Hello, hello. How's everyone doing today? Thank you for coming out. We appreciate it. We are honored to have our friend Marc Percansky here. He's got a new book, and his co-author Matt Steichen will be here later, but please give a warm welcome to the stage, Marc Percansky.
Hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. I'm very honored to be here. This is my favorite place on earth. I'm not kidding. This is like my Disneyland. Coming here my whole life, almost my whole life, was my mother who found this place back in 1972. You were here? And it was smaller. It was in the middle. And she was on her way, she worked at we had a family nightclub called the Flame Cafe. I don't know if anybody here would remember that place. All right, we have somebody who remembered it. And she'd stop in for rolling papers. It was the best place to get Job Black. Did I say that right? And so I grew up here, and just coming here my whole life. It's a landmark. Love it. I want to thank the record store manager, Bob Fuchs. I've been pestering that guy every Tuesday, it used to be, for the new releases, and I want to thank him for everything. I might as well get the thank yous out of the way in case I don't forget them later on. I want to thank another lady who we wouldn't be here without, because I said I got a new book out, and she says, great, you want to do a signing? Okay, that's news to me. So I want to thank Kim Baldwin back there. Give her a hand. The gift department buyer for how many years, Kim? 43 years. All righty. And last but not least, I want to thank the marketing, what is that? I can't even remember the right title here. Advertising and marketing director, Dawn Novak, who put everything together, did all the stuff for online, you see. I bothered her in between all the other stuff going on in Fetus. I had to compete with Barbie. That was kind of rough. Barbie and Bob, but we did our best and we got in here, and I'm glad all of you, thank you all for coming out. I want to thank some people who did the press, Seth Rowe at the St. Louis Park Sailor, Mordecai Spector at the Jewish World, American Jewish World, and John Bream at the Star Tribune. And lastly, I want to thank our co-writers, Paul Metza and Ed Newman, who are not here. And I want to thank KG, Keith Miles in the UK, for putting us all together, creating this idea in this book, and hand-picking Matt and I. We're the Twin Cities version, the Twin Cities experts on Bob. And I want to thank our publishers who put out the book, McNidder Grace. That would be Andy and Caroline Payton Smith. That should do it for the thank yous, and now onward. So the book is called Bob Dylan in Minnesota, Troubadour Tales from Duluth, Hibbing, and Dinkytown, okay? And first of all, let me say I did not plan on writing a book. I had no intention on writing a book at all. I never did. And and my mom, who has many stories about Bob, she never wanted to write a book, and she wasn't feeling well, and she said to me, then I got out of the blue, wasn't quite out of the blue, I had already known about Keith, KG Miles in London, because if you flip over the book, there's two other books on the back, Bob Dylan in London and Bob Dylan in the Big Apple. It's kind of a tourist guide of the locations, and I knew about these books, so I was aware of Keith, and I knew someday, he's got to do one in Minnesota. So sure enough, he contacted me, and he said, would you like to help out with this book? I'm doing Bob Dylan in Minnesota. I live in London. I can't come here, I live in the UK. Can you help out? Sure, I'll help out. I'll be a consultant, and I'll help you. So then he says, okay, that went on for about a month. Matt might have already came on board, but I'll let him tell you how he came about. But so then it goes on, and my mom's pretty sick, and I wasn't really into, writing anything. And he says, Mark, would you mind writing a troubadour tale? And I said, okay, you want me to write a troubadour tale? I can do that. That's, make it up, or it's either true or false. I think I can do that. So I had trouble, there's short little tales in here, and I had trouble writing. It didn't come out right. And I think the problem was because I thought that I had to write everything in my life all together and put it in one book, and that it just wasn't working, and that's not possible. So once I figured out that I could pick a subject, then I was onto something. And at that time, my mom passed away, so that kind of changed my outlook on things and what I was writing about, and it gave extra meaning to the book. So I figured, all right, I'm going to write a little about my mom and Bob, and some of their adventures together. So I started with that, and I picked the Infidels album around that time period, focused on that album because he was around here a lot, and that album has some special meaning. I think she actually inspired that title, Infidels. I didn't say that in the book, but somebody was always married to somebody else. Okay, so I don't know. So the title, and you'll read about that in the book. And so I had that. Then I figured, all right, got that tale going. I was writing there, and then I said, all right, I got to write about me and my magic and Bob and something I knew with him together, and put that together, and I based that on the album Real Live, the 1984 album. So those are in the book. Then Keith said, would you mind writing an afterword? I said, okay, now I got to write an afterword. All right, I'm going to write the afterword. So anything that didn't go in those 2 chapters, I stuck in the afterword and worked on that. So I'm already now writing 3 chapters. It's going okay at the same time. And then he says, Paul Metz would like you to write the history of the session guys and Blood on the Tracks, all the gigs they did. I was done writing, and then I said, all right, I put that together. So I wrote that, and that's basically my stuff in here, and you'll find it. It's a fun read. And then I also wrote, there's one thing I'm really proud of, actually. I think I should read a little something from the book, okay? If I can see it. Small print, but I want to read about how the electric fetus gets involved in the book. It's a spoiler alert, but they're in here, and it's important. So I'm going to read that chapter. Not that whole chapter, but it comes from, because I think it's more important than people think. It'll give you a flavor for the book. It's from chapter 31, the opening bars, Tangled Up in Midnight Blues. This is KG Miles talks to Kevin Odegard, okay, who's also got an interview in the book. Okay? So here's what he says in it. He says, so what was the genesis of the now famous opening bars? In recent years, it has been revealed that they can be traced to a little-known 60s band, Joy of Cooking, and the track Midnight Blues from their album Back to Your Heart. Let Odegard explain. What did I take away from a late-night obsession with records nobody else wanted, and where did I hear them? KQRS Radio in Minneapolis played deep cuts all night long, and my roommate above the West Bank rail yards around the same time was Shel Danielson, also known as DJ Alan Stone. So I had a source, a connection, and I followed my ears to find this and other rewrites that spoke to me. Okay, other rarities that spoke to me. Midnight Blues haunted me day and night. The suspended fifth figure lived in my blood from the moment I heard Joy of Cooking on the radio. I bought the record at the Electric Fetus the morning after I heard that song and wore out the grooves on side 1, track 1, precisely where Tangled Up in Blue landed on Blood on the Tracks. So had you guys not had the Joy of Cooking Midnight Blue album, we might have had a different song on the Blood on the Tracks album with the opening bars. That's Kevin Odegard. There you go. That's the spoiler alert for the Electric Fetus, okay? So I don't want to give away too much about the book and whatnot. It's a nice, fun, easy read, about 2 hours to 3 hours, depending on how fast you read. One thing, by the way, we all edited it. We all 4 of us, so-called experts that Keith picked. He picked 2 of Matt and I, and we all kind of edited each other's stuff. We caught each other's mistakes, and we all worked on, fine-tuning it. It took about a year and about 14 months in production from knowing about this book till having it here today. And apparently they're done now with this trilogy of books. There's 3 of them, and you can get the other 2 online. Bob Dylan London, Bob Dylan in New York, the Big Apple, but this one's the best one, I must say. And they're independent of each other. They don't, you can pick one, and so we're really proud of it. It's kind of a lot like Bob's personality, It's got, 1 minute we're joking about onion rings and A&W, root beer stands and Hibbing, and the next minute there's some serious stuff. It's got, and it's not just from Minnesota, his whole life is in here. We talk about everything. It goes all the way to present day. But one part I'm really proud of, and I put this together, is this little dealie here at the back. It's, okay, if I can find it. It's a history of Bob Dylan concerts in Minnesota from 1965 to 2019. So if you have the book later on, you want to go back and reference it, and you say, hey, I saw Bob, what year was it? And I just had this happen to me the other day. This guy goes, I saw him, I think it was at some park in St. Paul in the mud in the 80s. I go, you mean Riverfest, right? So he goes, yeah, Riverfest. So you find the date, the location, the venue in here, and it's the entire history of all the shows he played as a professional artist in Minnesota, the whole state. It's all on one page. And I put that together. So I thought I'd tell you that, all right? So other than that, that's about it. What else can I tell you about it? There's maps at the back, so if you're ever there and you need to know the key locations, you can check it right out. And how many people, does anyone have the book yet or has read it? Some people already read it. All right, you liked it? You liked it? All right, you liked it. So we'll talk a little bit more about it in the Q&A we're going to do. And that's the story about it. So I want to bring out somebody now who, let me tell you about this guy, okay? I can read his bio real quick, just for the fun of it. Matt Steichen has worked in journalism, public relations, and marketing in the Twin Cities since 2006. He's written and presented on the topic of Bob Dylan's life and music to a variety of audiences. He has seen Bob in concert 50 times going back to 2006. He's like a walking encyclopedia of Bob Dylan information. I'm telling you, the guy knows something. Well, here's an example of what he knows, okay? So we're working on the maps, right? The maps almost didn't get in the book. They went down to the wire. I said, we need the maps in the book, you know, this is a big part. So we had to come up with a little guide, like a blueprint of a map of the area. And I did the Dinkytown one, which you'll see in there. Did all the locations there. So we needed a Hibbing one. The Duluth one was done by, I think, Ed Newman. The Hibbing one. So I found like a blueprint map of Hibbing, okay? I said, here's a blueprint. I don't know anything about where all the locations are in Hibbing. Send it to this guy, the blueprint of the map, okay? About 10 minutes later, a thing circled in, penciled in, exact addresses of all like 18 spots of everywhere that Bob, everything in Hibbing to the spot, okay? He knew. So it came out, it was just mind-blowing. And that's now been polished up and it's in the book, okay? So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, my co-author, Matt Steichen.
Hello everybody, I'll try to live up to that, we'll see. I guess I'll start before I talk about how I got involved in the book. I plugged the book as part of Duluth Dylan Fest in May as the keynote speaker for that, and I started with this quote from Rolling Stone magazine in 2009, and I really think it kind of encapsulates what's the main idea at the heart of this book, so I'm just going to read this from Rolling Stone magazine. Dylan belongs to no city or state. There is Dylan the family man who spends his time in California with his children and grandchildren in Malibu, West Hollywood, and Beverly Hills. Sometimes Dylan lingers in the Bay Area for weeks at a time, sketching fishmongers and longshoremen. As a New York Yankees fan, he can be found sitting behind first base in the Bronx on random autumnal nights, wishing Mickey Mantle were still batting cleanup. But it's Minnesota's North Country, which seems to always lie just over the frozen brow of a long-remembered field, where the road still reaches into the void of below-zero blue winter days. That remains Dylan's touchstone place. That's the American landscape which has influenced him most. The Great Lakes region is where he learned the Mexican conjunto music by way of Polish polka bands. You can't find the real Dylan spirit in Greenwich Village or in an LA studio, a Yazoo River juke joint, or a Laredo cafe. For underneath all his mercurial antics and standing ovations, Dylan is so down home that he considers the boondocks of Hibbing and Duluth to be far grander than Paris. So how I got involved in the book. I post on Twitter a lot, and that's how I know some of you guys, and that's how KG Miles got a hold of me. I think he was pulling together his content for his book, and we've followed each other on Twitter for a few years, so he sees my Dylan content that I post a lot. So after probably one of our trips up to Duluth and Hibbing in like 2020 or 2021, I posted a bunch of photos from random spots in Hibbing and Duluth. Just kind of the main touristy places you'd go if you're an obsessed Bob Dylan fan and you're driving around those towns. And so Keith reached out to me and said, can I use some of your photos of my book? And I said, sure, no problem. And eventually he asked if I wanted to write anything. And what I ended up writing was kind of what Bob Dylan thinks about Minnesota. The book already had plans, we'd have a chapter about Dinkytown and about his, the house he grew up in and stuff. And having that, but not having information about what Bob said about all those things kind of would leave the book kind of hollow. So I figured I should probably research everything Bob Dylan's ever said about Minnesota. So I went to archives of hundreds of Bob Dylan interviews and searched Minnesota, Hibbing, Duluth, youth, childhood, every keyword I could think of, and kind of pulled together every Bob Dylan quote I could find that referenced his youth. And it was I've read a lot of it already, but it was a pretty enlightening thing. So that's how I ended up getting involved in the book. And I moved to Minnesota in 2006. I met my wife at a Bob Dylan concert in 2004 in the front row, just randomly, kind of like, hey, have you ever been to a Bob Dylan concert before? And that's why I'm here in Minnesota. And so I moved up here in 2006, and when I did that, I learned that at least the rumor was that a lot of people in Minnesota don't appreciate Bob Dylan, or don't like him, or think that he abandoned Minnesota. And the more biographies and stuff that I read, the more I found that that just wasn't really true. So I wondered why there was such a misconception among the general public. And so I want to read a few of the things that I also talked about in my presentation in Duluth, which you can watch on the internet if you really want to, or read it. So these are just some of the quotes about Minnesota that Bob Dylan has said over the years. And some of these were some pretty obscure interviews that weren't widely spread. So lots of people haven't heard this stuff. So I just want to read a few of them. All right, the first one I'm actually going to, it's a Louis Kemp quote, because in 2019, his lifelong best friend Louis Kemp was in Duluth, and I got a chance to ask Louis about what Bob thinks about Minnesota. So this is what Louis told me. He said, growing up in northern Minnesota had a big influence on us. You can take the boys out of northern Minnesota, but you can't take northern Minnesota out of the boys. It was an important part of our experiences, our values, and forming who we are, how we dealt with people to this day. I don't know where people got that idea. That's not true. So those early rumors that Bob didn't like Minnesota came about because when he was 20, he changed his name and made up his past, just to try to, create a new image for himself that people would find interesting and would give him musical credibility in Greenwich Village. And that's what happened. So if people hold that grudge 60 years later, then they can, I guess. But I don't think that's fair, really. I grew up in a place that I thought was pretty boring and didn't have a lot to offer too, but I still can see that it very much had an impact on who I was. So by 1962, his first record came out, and it said on the sleeve that he's from Minnesota. So that, fake identity he had was very short-lived. So I think we should probably move on from that if that's why anybody's still holding a grudge against Bob Dylan. But that's just me. So by 1963, Bob said this to the Emergency Civil Liberties Committee. He said, "My country is the Minnesota-North Dakota Territory. That is where I was born and learned how to walk, and it's where I was raised and went to school. My youth was spent wildly among the snowy hills and sky-blue lakes, willow fields, and abandoned open pit mines. Contrary to rumors, I'm very proud of where I'm from." He also said in 1966, "The people that live in Minnesota, they're nice people. I've been all over the world since I left there, and they still stand out as being the least hung up. There's no place I feel closer to now or get the feeling that I'm part of, except maybe New York, but I'm not a New Yorker. I'm North Dakota, Minnesota, Midwestern. I'm that color. I speak that way. I'm from someplace called the Iron Range. My brains and feelings have come from there." And then in 1978, he said, "I feel very comfortable in Minnesota, and I do go back up to Hibbing every so often. I relax in Minnesota more than I do in California or anywhere else. In my spare time, I probably just like to go back to Minnesota and let everything else drift away. It's where I feel rooted, I feel more familiar with the landscape, the people, and the earth, I think. I feel more at home there." And then the last thing I want to cover is I was invited to speak in Tulsa in May, and I had some ideas for what I wanted to talk about there, and my talk was approved, but I couldn't make it. It was busy last week of school here. But I want to talk about Bob and his legacy visions. I think a lot of times whether you're writing a Timothy Chalamet script or a biography or a documentary, I think Minnesota is so overlooked with how it shaped Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan is a Minnesota creation by Bobby Zimmerman. By the time he left Minnesota, he had it in his mind what he wanted to do. And I think that creation and the idea of Bob Dylan and young Bobby Zimmerman goes back way further and is way more complicated than it's ever given credit in the biographies and things. And that's what I always thought when I read these things, like, why does one or two chapters cover 20 years of his life? That's like a fourth of his life. So it never seemed like there was enough digging into that. So I want to talk a little bit about legacy visions and kind of what that means to me. So for background, if you don't know this, Bob has said on multiple occasions he knew he wanted to be a famous musician and travel the world as a musician from the time he was 9 or 10 years old. So it really wasn't, he had an exit strategy, how he was going to get seen, get famous, and get out of Hibbing and change the world and be a huge figure. And he actually did it, which is just amazing. But in 1963, it came out in early '64, but in the liner notes to the Times They Are Changin', he said that the place that I grew up is the one that left me with my legacy visions. Now I take that to mean, you can interpret it however you want, but I would say it means that he considers the place, he thinks the place that he grew up allowed him to see all that he was capable of, and it kind of fueled his ambition and kind of, helped him see who he was and what he could do. He got it, there was actually a story in the Star Tribune yesterday about why are there so many famous people from Hibbing, and I think the fact that they had a well-funded school system, he got to play on an amazing stage from the time he was a little kid. He got that feeling of what it was like to be have those opportunities, and he knew that he wanted to go out and change the world, and so I have a few other quotations that relate to that. And these are quotes that I don't see referenced very often, but I think they're incredibly revealing and showing just how much his experience in Minnesota not only shaped who he is as a person, but really fueled his ambition and fueled his imagination, because his songs are the work of his imagination, and arguably no one's had been more imaginative in what popular music could be over the last 60 years. So here's what he had to say about Minnesota and how it shaped his imagination when he was a kid. I had some amazing projections when I was a kid, but none since then, and those visions have been strong enough to keep me going through today. There was a feeling of wonder. I projected myself toward what I might personally, humanly do in terms of creating any kinds of reality. He said in the winter, everything was still, nothing moved. 8 months of that, you can put it together. You can have some amazing hallucinogenic visions and experiences doing nothing but looking out your window. Then there was in summer when it got hot and sticky and the air is very metallic. There was a lot of Indian spirit. The earth there is unusual, filled with ore. So there's something happening that is hard to define. There's a magnetic attraction there for me. And then he said, I feel Minnesota more than I feel New York or LA. My work reflects the thoughts I had as a little kid that have become super developed. And then in 1985 he said, if I had any advantage over anybody at all, it's the advantage that I was all alone and could think and do what I wanted to. Looking back on it, it probably has a lot to do with growing up in northern Minnesota. I don't know what I would have been if I would have grown up in the Bronx or Ethiopia or South America or even California. I think everybody's environment affects them in that way. So that's kind of what I did in my chapter of the book, is look at how growing up in Minnesota affected Bob Dylan, both as a person and in his music. So hopefully you enjoy that chapter. So that's the only one I wrote. But all right, are we ready to take questions, Mark?
All right, sure. Let's hear it for Matt Steichen. Where's Jennifer? Can you come up here? This is Jennifer. This family is pictured here on page 138. The story about them. It's very incredible. I wanted the 4 boys here today, but they're home listening to some other Bob Dylan baseball stuff, so I don't know. But Jennifer, would you like to say anything about this book, or you're dealing with it all?
I know that a lot of time and effort went into it. Yeah.
I was supposed to be working. I was at my office. So.
Yeah. I was asked if I had anything to contribute, and that was like, not. It's like I already said everything there is to say.
Yeah, well, I told them our story. Yeah.
I'm a bad wife. I haven't actually read the book yet, so I don't know what to say. I'm sorry. But we have 4 boys, 6 and up, and so we've been busy with summer camp and baseball, and yeah.
The oldest has seen Bob how many times?
5. They've all been to see him in concert. They grew up with it in their blood. They don't understand why nobody at their school knows who Bob Dylan is. Because they've been listening to it since they were in the womb. They've gone, yeah. So
I think that's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Young boys listening to Bob. I mean, I can't figure out if the parents forced it on them or they're just in birth. They heard it and they just grew up loving him.
They're genetically predisposed.
They're genetically.
Yeah. They stood in Bob's childhood garage at his home in Hibbing and sang Mr. Tambourine Man, which was kind of surreal, because that's where his little first garage band used to play. And I think they kind of recognized the importance and like the, of that moment and the magnitude of it, so it's pretty cool.
And they were there in Milwaukee in 2021 when Bob debuted 8 brand new songs, and they appreciated that more than just as much as anyone in the entire crowd. They were so excited to hear these songs that
they recognized
brand
them
new
like
Bob
from the
songs.
first notes.
First notes,
like
yeah.
Immediately, like it's False Prophet.
It's False Prophet.
So it's fun. It's fun. Yeah.
How many Bob concerts did you see before you met Matt?
A lot. So Matt's first line he ever spoke to me was, "Have you ever seen Bob Dylan in concert before?" And I was like, well, I just saw him in Paris last fall, and I think that was like maybe 35 for me or something at the time, and so I think he thought, yeah, he was going to teach me
That's
the
a
ways.
good, yeah.
But he's.
It's a good answer.
But your line, he always says, what do you, your pickup line?
Just, have you ever been to a Bob Dylan concert?
No, you
before?
said I was the only person.
Oh yeah, I said that in my Duluth was that. Yeah, that was the only pickup line I had, and that was the only place in the world where it would have worked.
Yeah. So.
There you go. Great family. There are 2 great chapters in the book, and a lot to read on them. You'll be amazed. It's one of the greatest things I've ever read about a family. They were at the cover of the Pioneer Press, wrote about them, and
Well, and I.
you'll see them on tour with Bob, right?
You'll see us, and I feel it's surreal because I've known Marc longer than I've known my husband, because I used to see Marc at shows when I was probably like 16 years old. We'd be up front together.
I think it was at the one you met at.
Were you?
No,
2000.
Oh, you probably were.
Later on,
yeah, you
yeah.
probably
Didn't
were.
know that.
So I've known you quite a bit longer than I've known you, and it's very strange to be up here with you guys in this situation. It's bizarre. I wish the kids were here, but.
All right. Jennifer,
Yeah,
give
so.
her a big hand. All right, so we'll do a little Q&A if you have any questions. I want to say hello to my old buddy Mike Johnson. We did a magic show. We did a radio show at our St. Louis Park radio station called the Magic Mark Mr. Mike Show. And we played bootleg Bob Dylan albums. They tuned in from far away. They're on my website if you want to hear 2 16-year-olds babbling on about Bob, and so they're still there. So hello to Michael and the other Michael Johnson. We got 2 Mike Johnsons here today. So thank you for coming. My sister Romy, I want to say hello to for coming. She has plenty of Bob stories herself. One day she walked in and he was playing guitar for her on our family Gibson that was given to us by Waylon Jennings. He wanted like that guitar. So she has Romy. Thank you for coming. So let's start it up. Does anyone have any questions? For either of us? Questions? None? No? Nevada Bob? Come on.
Nevada Bob.
Anybody, any questions? Right there.
Do you have any stories about Bob Dylan?
Good question. What's your name?
Teresa.
Okay. I have a lot of... What was the question again? Do you have a lot of stories? But what was the question?
Any stories about Bob Dylan?
Yes, and I think now would be the time to say them, because we're in Prince headquarters here. So I have a lot of Bob stories in Prince. Do you want to hear them? Yeah. Okay, so, one thing I can think of is, I kind of left this out of the book because it was more about Bob, but there's a book out that came out in 2019 by Marty Keller, and it was called Hijinks and Hearsay. And in the book, he talks about, he talks about, Bob wanted to meet Prince. So he put out the call to Larry Keegan, his buddy, and he said, can you get me in touch with Prince? And Larry went to Marty, and so this is in the book. And he went and he got a hold of Prince's management, and they came back, and this is in the book, and he said, I could never deal with that mind. He refused. So Bob didn't give up, because I know, Bob loved Prince because in 1984 we got him 8 tickets to see him during the Purple Rain, December. There was many concerts there, and Bob went and he loved it. And I did a magic show for Prince. Actually, it's in my bio that I performed for Prince, but it's not entirely accurate, and I'll tell you why. Here's what I say. I was hired by Alan Leeds to do a magic show at Prince's Prom Center Around the World in a Day party in 1985. Does anybody remember the Prom Center? Oh, yeah. Okay, you were there. Kim, you were there. Okay, so I didn't really perform for him. What I did was I performed for Prince watching my sister watch me. that's kind of what happened. He walked over. It was a wonderful party. It went from 8 at night. It started till like 4 in the morning. And I was set up into the stage act. And he walks over, you know that Prince walk, the high heels? He walks over and he looks at her. You know, she's a blonde, nice-looking lady, my older sister. He looks at her, he looked at me, and he walked away. So that was how I performed for Prince. But I was hired there, and I was there. And actually, I do have something that I want to present to you. From that event, and I'm going to give this to Electric Fetus because he gave away tambourines that say "Love God" on them. So I'm going to give this to as a gift to the Electric Fetus for having me here tonight. Kim, would you come get this? That's yours. Love God. Love God. So that's my Prince story. So then Bob didn't give up because he asked my mom to get a hold of Prince. He said, just get a hold of him. So she got a hold of Alan Leeds. Now this happened maybe a year or two later, 84, 85. I don't know. I don't think I've never told this to anyone, so nobody knows this. So you're lucky you're here, you're listening to it today. So she gets a call into Alan Leeds, and Bob's over, and she gets a call back, and Prince, what happened? Bob says, so the quote this time was, "I'm not ready to match minds with Bob." So I can still see Bob laughing in the living room, scratching his hair, going, what does he mean, match minds? I just want to maybe collaborate with him, okay? So, didn't happen. This was round 2. So I did want to record with him. Then later on, we're on tour during the True Confessions tour, and the movie Under the Cherry Moon, I remember, was getting badly panned. And Bob wanted to go see that movie, and we right in the middle of the tour, we think we were in Buffalo or something in '86, and we went to see the movie Under the Cherry Moon. And he said, I can't understand, that movie was great. I don't know, there was nothing the matter with that movie. I don't know why they wrapped that movie. So that was that with Bob. Now, so that's where my story ends, as far as I know. But I do know, Matt, you'd have to check this out. I heard, and I don't know if it's true, they were both at a party once, maybe like a Grammy party. Now they're both double Geminis, and they both got their own way. They're both, you know, outstanding. And I heard they both looked at each other and went the other way. One went that way, one went that way. So I don't know. But that's it. Bob did love him and wanted to record with him. That's what I know about. That's my Prince story for you all. Okay? Anybody else? Because we're going to get to the tables and sign some books. Does anybody else want to ask a question for Matt or I? No callers. Going once, going twice, so we'll hit the tables. Okay, thank you. Oh, you got one right here. So, yep.
You mentioned there were several famous people. Who else?
I only read the first part where they talked about Bob, and then I stopped reading. But Kevin McHale is one other one. I know that.
That article. Yeah, there was another name.
Yeah.
Louis, the guy.
Gary Puckett.
Yeah. Kevin McHale.
Roger Maris, the single-season home run champion.
Yes. That was written by Krista Lawler in the Duluth. It was Duluth for the Star Tribune, and probably in the feature in tomorrow's paper. There was another one, though, Gino Palucci. You got it, Gino Palucci?
Governor Ruby Purpose.
Purpich?
The guy who,
Yeah.
Robert Mondani.
Okay. Gino Palucci, yes, he was a friend of ours from the Grandma's restaurant. Who else? Okay, all right, cool. Thank you for the question. Nevada Bob.
I had Charlie McCoy play on my last album.
Yes.
He played on Desolation Road for 11 minutes, played the guitar on it.
Yes.
And Charlie said it was really interesting.
Incredible. Yes. This is Nevada Bob, ladies and gentlemen. He wrote a book too.
was recorded.
Thank you.
He just recorded in Nashville with Charlie McCoy.
Recorded with Nat. How's Charlie doing?
He's doing great. We saw him at the Opry. We were backstage doing it at the last Opry they played on Saturday.
Wonderful.
And he was just doing fabulous. Just loving the crowd.
He's playing on Blonde, right?
Oh, yeah.
Four albums.
And several other Bob albums, I think.
He did 4 albums with it.
How many?
4 in Nashville.
In Nashville.
Blonde on Blonde was the first.
What are the other 3?
National
Wesley
Skyline, probably.
Harding,
National Skyline.
Yes.
Skyline.
Yes.
Self-portrait.
Yes, there you go. He's still doing it today. He's doing good. He's healthy.
Good.
All right. So there you go. We'll thank you all for coming. We'll sign some books. We'll see you over there. Okay.
I want a round of applause for Marc and Matt. Thank you all for coming out. We do have copies behind the counter to sell, and then we got a little table. Dawn's going to wave her hand there if you want to meet those guys and have your book signed. We're going to set up a little table over to the end of the counter there. So thank you so much for coming out, everyone. We do appreciate it.